You're standing in a ruin that used to be a castle. No roof, no windows, just broken stone, open sky, and the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels held. The wind moves like it's remembering something. Something you probably don't want to know anything about. Cachtice Castle sits up high in the Carpathian hills of what is now Slovakia, but back then it was a part of Hungary. Back then things were different. They say the walls were soaked in blood, that screams carried down the corridors, and that girls were sent to this place and never came home. The woman who lived here was named Elizabeth Bathory. Some called her a monster. Some said she was just dangerous enough to make men nervous. And some still believe she bathed in blood. Most of the stories you hear are soaked in that same blood. You don't need to believe all of it, but you do need to know that some of it is true. There were bodies. There were accusations. There was no trial. Just a door bricked shut from the outside. This isn't a ghost story, but it's not clean history either. I'm Papa G, and this is the Feral Folklorist, and today we're walking into the ruins of Cachtice Castle to figure out what's folklore, what's real, and why the name Elizabeth Bathory still makes people flinch. Elizabeth Bathory, born Elizabeth Bathory in 1560, came from one of the most powerful noble families in Hungary. Her bloodline included bishops, princes, and eventually a prime minister. Her parents were both Bathorys, cousins by blood, and in noble families like that, inbreeding wasn't rare. It was strategic. It kept the power consolidated. She was educated, spoke 4 languages, learned math, science, philosophy, which might not sound like much now, but for a woman in the 16th century, that was rare. At 15, she married Ferenc Nazadeh. He was from a military family with less money, but more clout on the battlefield. This marriage gave them everything: land, wealth, and Cachtice Castle. While Ferenc went off to fight the Ottomans, Elizabeth ran the estate. And that's where the stories start. Ferenc was away for long stretches. When he did come home, some say he taught Elizabeth brutal ways to discipline the servants, stuffing oiled paper between their toes and lighting it, covering them in honey and leaving them outside for the insects. That might be true, or it might be something people repeated because they wanted it to be true. What we do know is that Ferenc died in 1604, and Elizabeth did not remarry. She managed the estate herself with hundreds of staff, massive land holdings, and an influence that rivaled some men. That kind of independence didn't sit well, especially not for a widow with power. So the rumors began. First, it was a missing maid, then a servant girl who died under strange circumstances. Peasant girls who came to work there never returned home. Now, deaths in noble houses weren't uncommon. These were harsh times. There was disease and malnutrition and accidents. They all happened. But then came the reports from other nobles. Lesser families sent their daughters to serve in Bathory's household for refinement. Some came back disfigured. Others didn't come back at all. And that's when people started listening to the rumors. In 1610, King Matthias II ordered an investigation. The man in charge was Yori Thurzo, a cousin of Elizabeth and the Palatine of Hungary. This position was delicate. He couldn't be seen as protecting her, but a public trial would be a disaster, a scandal. So instead, he raided the castle. Witnesses claimed they found girls, some dead, some dying, and testimonies poured in, nearly 300 statements. One claimed a diary existed listing 650 victims, but that diary never found. No physical proof, just all hearsay. But still, the accusation stuck. Elizabeth was never given a trial. Instead, 3 of her servants were tortured and executed. One had her fingers torn off before being burned alive. Another was mutilated with hot pincers. And Elizabeth was sealed into a room in her own castle, with no windows, one small slit for food. No priest, no hearing, just silence. She died 4 years later, 1614. Originally buried in the village cemetery, but the locals didn't want her there. Her body was removed, and to this day, no one knows where. And the bloodbath? That part of the story didn't show up until much later. It's not in the trial records. It's not in the testimonies. It was added by pamphlet writers, dramatists, and Gothic horror fans, because basically it sells to it sticks. What we do know is this: girls died, bodies were found, and the rest, the torture, the blood rituals, the vanity, that may have been added to make her unforgettable. And it worked. So let's talk about what the story actually does, magically speaking. Whether or not Elizabeth Bathory ever killed anyone, and there's good reason to think she did, what sticks in the magical mind isn't just the violence, it's the ritual, the blood, the beauty, the control. Blood has always been serious business in magic. In hoodoo, European witchcraft, folk healing, and ritual traditions from all around the world, really, blood's not used casually. It ties things. It feeds things. It marks something as yours. In hoodoo, it's usually just a drop or two, added to food to keep a lover faithful, or used to bind someone emotionally. It's potent, and dangerous, and permanent. So when the story says Elizabeth bathed in it, that's not just cruelty. That's symbolic overkill. It's not about killing. It's about consuming. Turning the sacred into something indulgent. A kind of reversed ritual. Because bathing in folk practice is about cleansing. It's about washing away illness or sin or grief or cross conditions. You bathe to begin again. But in this legend, she's not washing anything off. She's soaking in it. That's what makes the image stick. It feels like a ritual turned inside out. Then you have the mirror. Folklore paints Bathory as obsessed with beauty and youth. And in that, the mirror becomes more than a tool. It becomes the altar. Now, in folk magic, mirrors were never neutral. They held energy. They reflected truth, or they reflected lies. They're used in scrying, in spirit work, in divination, and in some homes, mirrors are covered when someone dies to keep the soul from being trapped. So when Bathory's story makes the mirror the thing that shows her aging and drives her to kill to keep her reflection young, it's playing into a very old fear that the mirror sees too much, and that it judges, and that it holds on to something. That's a kind of glamour magic, but the ugly kind, the kind based on control and fear. It's not always blood and mirrors anymore. But we still sacrifice rest and peace and authenticity in order to maintain some image of what power should look like. And the Bathory legend holds that image up and dares us to look at it. So now her punishment. She was sealed in a room. Like we said, no trial, no death sentence, just bricked in. That's not really justice. That's containment. So in folk magic, that's how you handle something you cannot control. You bury it, or you bind it, or you wall it off. Some people stick it in a bottle and seal it with wax. That's not what they did to her, though. Not because they didn't believe she was powerful, but because they did. And that fear still shows up in magical spaces today. Covens invoke her name, not out of admiration necessarily, but to work with what she represents. Some use her as a caution, others as a reclamation, and some as a symbol of blood rights, beauty magic, and the power to be defiant. You don't have to like it, but it is happening, and people do call upon her for these things. So her name, Bathory, has become a sigil, one charged with everything people fear in a powerful woman: blood, sex, rage, vanity, and control. And like all sigils, it gets stronger every time it's repeated. So whether she was a monster or a scapegoat, or both, her image becomes magic. So Cachtice Castle isn't much now, just crumbling stone and scattered tourists. It's technically a nature preserve, which is funny considering how little peace it holds. There's no real rooms left actually, just outlines of them. And wind moves through it in a way that doesn't feel clean. It feels like it's pushing through something thick. Like it has to remember where the walls used to be. During the day, it's a place for photo ops, something to hike to. But the locals, they don't stay after dark. Not because of jump scares or ghost tours, because there aren't any, but because something about the place sits heavy. Not loud or dramatic. There's just something wrong in the feeling of that place. And we're not talking about just the castle. The whole region has a kind of weight to it. Folk stories from around the surrounding villages say the land still listens, that some places never stop remembering horrors from the past. Now, in modern occult circles, there's a running belief that Elizabeth Bathory can be summoned, that her spirit will still respond, not as a ghost you see in the hallway, but something more ritualistic than an apparition. Most people who work seriously don't mess with it. Not because she's evil. Most of us don't really traffic in that word. It's because she's volatile. She's unbound and she's messy. You don't call upon something like that unless you're really sure of your reasons behind it. And even then, maybe don't do it. But people still try. There's one story that comes up again and again, different tellers, but the same bones of the story. It's about a group of witches in old buildings somewhere in Eastern Europe, though the location changes. They reconstruct the castle, not literally, but symbolically, with mirrors and red candles and wine and blood. They say her name. They ask for power, protection, and beauty. What they get is not what they wanted. They say the dreams start first, with blood under fingernails and faces in broken glass. Their shadows watching them from behind their own reflections. One woman started bleeding from her nose every day at the same hour. Another broke out in a rash she couldn't shake until she buried the mirror they used. Just enough to make you rethink what you've invited in. So was it her? Was it something wearing her name? Doesn't matter. If the name holds power, the results don't lie. That's the problem with spirits that are part of folklore. They don't come clean to you. They come layered, part history, part myth, part everything people projected onto them over the centuries. So when you call them, you're not just calling out a soul. You're calling every version of them that's ever been feared or misnamed or rewritten. So Bathory isn't just a haunting. She's a pattern. You can see it in how her story keeps showing up in pop culture. Fashion campaigns with red silk, or blood metaphors, or music videos that use aging women as symbols of horror. Characters in horror shows who still kill to stay young. It's not that people believe she really did it. It's that they want her to have done it, because the story says something we can't shake. We don't believe in bloodbaths anymore, but we still believe that women who age without permission are dangerous. And you see that reflected in smaller ways. It could be the older woman in town who doesn't dye her hair and people call her witchy. Or a single woman who keeps to herself and she gets treated like a threat to other women's marriages. Or the healer who gets blamed when someone gets sick. Bathory lives in these stories, not as a person, but as a warning. And not for what she did, but for who she refused to become. What haunts Cachtice Castle isn't just ghosts. It's a memory of how quickly people rewrite a life into a legend. It's how fast we can turn fear into a narrative to tell and retell. And how often, once that story's set, no one bothers to dig her out from underneath the fiction of it. So here's what we're left with. Elizabeth Bathory, noblewoman, widow, alleged killer, possibly one of the most prolific murderers in history. Possibly a woman crushed under the weight of a story she couldn't outrun. She was locked in a room, buried without a grave, and turned into a cautionary tale. We may never know the full truth, but we do know this. Her legend survived for a reason. Because it's useful, it holds weight, and it says something about how power is punished, especially in women, and how fast people will turn on you once you stop apologizing for what you are. And that's where this story still bites. So to close this out, we're going to do our spell section, and I want to offer a working that is not a blood rite, it's not a glamour magic, not a curse, but a charm. One for anyone who's ever been misread or misnamed or mistaken for something dangerous when all they were doing is showing up in their full self. So this charm is called To Be Seen Without Being Touched. And the purpose is to protect your energy while stepping into visibility for when you need to be recognized without being consumed. So it's presence without sacrifice. And what you're going to need is a small mirror, pocket size is fine, a piece of black thread or cloth, and a little dab of oil, like clove or rosemary or frankincense. And what you do is you write your full name on a small slip of paper. Anoint the mirror lightly with the oil, just a dab on the edge or the back is enough. Hold the mirror to your chest and say, "Let me be seen with truth, Let me be heard without harm. No mask, no shadow, no shame. Then you wrap that mirror in the thread or fold it into the cloth and place your name paper inside. So carry it when you know you'll be exposed, or speaking, or performing, or posting, or showing up, or any time that you would actually put yourself out there waiting for someone to scrutinize you, because they usually show up. You can also leave it in a doorway, put it in your altar or your workspace, something visible, somewhere where it can stand guard. And since you're going to carry it places, such as when you do public speaking or something, this is why you want a small mirror. Even a little square of mirror that you can find in a craft store will work. So it's not a hiding spell. It's a boundary. It's like a filter where it says, I will be seen, but only on my terms. So the Bathory legend gets remembered not because it's accurate, but because it hits a nerve. She wasn't just accused of violence. She was accused of taking pleasure in it. And that's always the difference when it comes to stories about women. The details that stick aren't the deaths, it's the ritual and the excess and the blood in the bath. Because it's not enough to say she hurt people. They needed her to enjoy doing it. Needed her to be vain and cold and beautiful and proud. They needed her to be the kind of woman that scares people even now. And that's how the legend holds power. It doesn't warn against violence. It warns against ambition or control. It warns against glamour. And that's why her story still matters. Because the blueprint keeps repeating itself. So you can also do a counter spell for these type of situations. You can say, you don't have to soften just to be safe. You don't owe anyone your sweetness. You don't have to explain your boundaries. And you don't need to shrink to make others comfortable. Let's go over that again, because a spell doesn't always require you to have a bunch of ingredients. The word spell comes from spoken language. It is about speaking something into existence. So let's do it again. You don't have to soften to be safe. You don't owe anyone your sweetness, meaning you don't have to be sweet to anyone. You don't have to explain your boundaries. You don't need to shrink to make others comfortable. So let them call you a legend, but make sure it's your story they're telling. That one line is something that people do a lot. You don't need to shrink to make others comfortable, because many women do this. They shrink to fit so that the man in their life will not feel she's overshadowing him. And if the right man is in your life, that's not something you need to do. So remember this the next time someone tries to hold you back. It's your story. Tell it your way and let them repeat it for the right reasons. This is the Feral Folklorist, and I'm Papa G, and next time we're talking about the Lady in White, ghosts that never really rest, and it's a look at the sorrowful spirits, the roadside hauntings, and what it means when the dead don't stay quiet. It's all these tales where we hear there was a lady in white. So for now, just remember, not every monster was real, and not every story was meant to protect you. If someone hands you a legend already written, take a hard look at who benefits from the telling of that story, and then decide what you'll leave out and what you won't. If you'd like to hear the after the show episode where I go deeper into the folklore, spill a little extra dirt, and sometimes rant just a bit, consider becoming a patron over on my Patreon at patreon.com/PapaG. You can find the official site for the podcast at feralfolklorist.com. And if you need spell supplies for any of the workings we talk about on the show, our metaphysical shop, Aromages Botanica, has been weaving magic for over 25 years. That's over at aromages.com.